morning, and bonjour à tout le monde. I will, I suppose, introduce each of the speakers in turn as they give their presentations, but just to tell you briefly right now and to, I guess, read what's already on the screen, our three speakers this morning are Cheryl Thompson, Tanya Southcott, and Céline Widmer. I'll let these three speakers give their presentations and we can save our questions to the end and let the three of them answer together. Cheryl Thompson is a PhD candidate in the Department of Art History and Communication Studies at McGill University. Her dissertation is an historical examination of Canada's Black beauty culture and the interrelationship between race, gender, and nation. The project explores the representation of Black women in visual media through portraiture, photography, film and television, and advertising, and how such images intersect with commodity culture. In 2012-2013, she was the recipient of the Fred and Betty Price Award and the Max Stern McCord Museum Fellowship, awarded jointly by my institute, the Institute for the Public Life of Arts and Ideas, and the McCord Museum. She is currently the recipient of the McGill Institute for the Study of Canada's Charles R. Bronfman and Alex K. Patterson Top-Up Award, and she has published articles in the Toronto Star, the Montreal Gazette, Women's Studies and Interdisciplinary Journal, the Canadian Theatre Review, and En Paradoxa, International Feminist Art Journal. She is also co-editor of In Circulation, the Art History and Communication Studies Department's graduate journal. The title of her paper this morning is Locating Absence, Interpreting Presence in the McCord's Collections.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. So this work, as Leah mentioned, is based on awards that I won at the McCord, but it's also based in part on a real interest that I had in kind of inquiring about some of these images that I myself had come across when I would explore the McCord's website. So I'll begin. In 1994, Black feminist scholar Bell Hooks said of photography, "Access and mass appeal have historically made photography a powerful location for the construction of an oppositional Black aesthetic. In the world before racial integration, there was a constant struggle on the part of Black folks to create a counter-hegemonic world of images that would stand as visual resistance challenging racist images. All colonized and subjugated people who, by way of resistance, create an oppositional substructure within the framework of domination, recognize that the field of representation, that is how we see ourselves, how others see us, is a site of ongoing struggle." Now, this quote I think is an important starting point for the work that I've done at the McCord and sort of my engagement with their collections. So when I won the Fred and Betty Price Award, I used that to collect images and lithographs of blackface performance in Montreal. And that work is actually going to be in a forthcoming book. I'll let you know when that happens. And then when I won the Max Stern Fellowship, I sort of used that for this work here. Well, I've actually combined the two works together, and the work that I did on the minstrelsy will be toward the end. And I sort of was interested in examining 19th century photographs of Black women that were taken in Montreal, Black and white women, I should say, and sort of looking at comparing the two and seeing what was the difference? How was difference cataloged and how was difference noted at the time of their production? And in both of these projects, I sort of argued that when you're doing historical work, you have to pay attention to how the photographic archive produces history in addition to the historical context of its production. So this paper is largely based on those experiences. It also considers an argument by Antoinette Burton, who writes, "Archives are not just sources or repertoires, but constitute full-fledged historical actors as well. The McCord's archive is not simply a collection of photographs and prints, nor is it a collection of passively silent database. The archive tells us about the historical past embodied in the frame of the picture, but it also speaks to what is not visible." Borrowing from Anne Stoller, who looks at the archives, as an epistemological experiment rather than as sources, this paper uses examples from the McCord's collection to illustrate the importance of thinking about the archive as subject rather than the archive as source. So to begin, I just wanted to go over some sort of theoretical scholars who have sort of reimagined how we engage with archives. So in Archive Stories, Antoinette Burton, who I quoted earlier, she writes, "In an era when the echo chambers of cyberspace have given a whole new dimension to the concept of the archive, questions about the relationship between evidence and history are at the forefront not just of academic discourse, but public debate around the world." Burton writes further that the need for archive stories, as she calls them, That is, narratives about how archives are created, drawn up, and experienced by those who use them to write history, stems in part from post-colonial studies and theories which have pointed to the fact that archives play a role in how we think about imperialism, conquest, and hegemony. Alan Sukala has famously noted the dualistic nature of the archive, in that he writes, and I quote, "Archives necessarily contain both the traces of the visible bodies of heroes, leaders, moral exemplars, celebrities, and at the same time, archives also contain traces of the poor, the diseased, the insane, the criminal, the non-white, the female, and all other embodiments of the quote-unquote unworthy." Michelle Strachan-Smith argues that archives are ideological, that they are conceived with political intent to make specific claims on cultural meaning. The choices that go into the creation of an archive, such as choosing one image over another while excluding others, they have implications on what is considered important and how we view history. So once an archive is compiled, it sort of makes a claim onto history. And it exists as a record of the past, but it also tells us something about how we can think about a future. The archive is a vehicle of memory, and as it becomes the trace on which an historical record is founded, it makes some people, things, ideas, and events visible, while at the same time relegating others through its signifying absence to invisibility. So using these works sort of as a starting point, I'm just going to go through some of the images that I found in the archive and sort of just make, I guess, what I think is sort of an intervention between what is present and what is absent in these images. So this first one here, Nurse and Baby, copied for Miss, I can never pronounce that name, so I'm not even going to try. If you notice in the name, the black female sitter is nameless, so we don't know who she is. And in the next image, it's quite the same situation. Now, art historian Charmaine Nelson, who's also at McGill and who's also my supervisor, she observes that through the process of naming, these images can displace and replace the subject with that of someone else. So here, the subjects in these photographs are named through their employer. So it's the name of the employer that comes to stand as the voice of these images. Now, since photographic portraits of black women from the 19th century have tended to name them either as the objects of a white household or they are nameless, when taken together, the description and the categorization of these photographic images have determined and to some extent framed the cultural context in which they were produced. While going through the archive, I noticed, there's a disproportionate number of images of white men and white women in the Notman collection. But, you sort of take that for what it is, given the historical record that, during the 19th century, there was a disproportionately less number of black subjects in Montreal than there were white and another persons. So thinking about that, and you're thinking about the archive as a subject, because there are so few images of black women, it's extremely difficult to really say much about who these women really were, other than being able to tell you about what they're wearing or how they're dressed or how they're posed. And that sort of poses a problem for a researcher because I can't really tell you who they are. There just isn't a record of them. And I think, at the time, one of the identifiable markers, most notably a name, because it's absent, you have to think about the photographer who named this image, right? And the person who requested the image. So a lot of times when you're looking at photographs of black women from the 19th century, it really is through the lens of the photographer and or their employer that you engage with those images. But not all black women photographed at the Notman studio were nameless or positioned under the employ of a white person. For example, here's another image. This one here. If you notice the clothing, her jewelry, her coiffures, her accessories, the decor, the drapery, the columns and the books and the furniture really do position her, as well as this image here, position them in the sort of context of what would have been considered a lady during that time period. Both women are positioned firmly within an interior space of wealth, of knowledge, of learning, and leisure. While their clothing may or may not have been their own, these portraits dramatically differ from the nurse counterparts that I showed you earlier. Miss Gilles Martin, I'll just go back to her, has a strong, direct gaze that is foregrounded by the fact that she wears a dress that would have been considered proper ladies' attire during the era. For example, this fashion print here from Godey's Ladies' Book, which was a popular 19th century women's magazine. If you notice the dress and the pose and the surroundings, they're all used to represent this ideal middle-class femininity. And while this image, this print, and this one, if you notice, the dates are obviously quite apart, about 40 to 30 years. What it does show, however, is how there were Black women in the 19th century who were sort of fashioning themselves to be middle class, what we would consider to be a middle class aesthetic. And so thus, even though the archive presents us with a lack of information on Black women who labored as nurses, and by extension, those who would have been considered of a lower socioeconomic class, it does have examples of Black women who were more likely middle class, as I said earlier. But I use that term kind of lightly because in the 19th century, there would have been few Black families that would have been sort of as well-to-do as their white counterparts, but it still shows you a distinction that when you're looking at the 19th century, these photographs, that you have to read them in the context and in a comparative way with other photographs of women who were similarly posed and similarly photographed. So with respect to the other image, this one, H. Evans and Leigh, it was exceedingly rare for a Black couple in formal dress to be photographed together in one frame in an interior setting in the 19th century. Instead, most of the depictions of Black men and women in the 19th century were quite derogatory and, by today's standard, racist. For example, in the 1860s, Harper's Weekly presented an average of 16 comic images of African Americans each year, and other publications also followed suit here in Canada. As Deborah Willis and Carla Williams have noted, until the late 19th century, the Black female was seldom the subject of a work of Western art. Thus, this photograph is actually quite extraordinary, not only for what it reveals, but how the image is framed by its name. Black women were rarely named as lady in the 19th century as well. The term lady was almost always designated for a white Victorian woman. In most English representations produced before the start of the American Civil War, for example, Jennifer DeVere Brody explains that a dark-skinned woman was permitted to become a proper and perhaps a propertied lady, provided that Providence procured for her proximity to a white gentleman. So stated otherwise, a Black woman could become a lady if she shifted her status by either marrying a white man and or if she could prove that she had some kind of white lineage in her background. Thus, the alignment of the sitter in this particular image with the ideal of the Victorian lady points to the significance, once again, of naming and how a photograph has the power to malign the body just as easily as it can align the body with a normative subject. Now, over the past 2 years, I have conducted research across Canada, in the United States, and while I haven't had the chance to travel overseas, I used online databases to go into the British Museum, and I looked at archives in Jamaica and across the Caribbean. And one of the things that struck me about the McCord's collection is just the sheer number of images. Like, it really is a tremendous resource, especially the Notman archive. In this regard, I just want to go through now and talk about some of the blackface minstrel photos that I found in the archive. And it was painstaking because I had to look through microfilm plates that were, anyways, it was really difficult, but I did it. And I found some really rare photographs that have really never been seen. So I just want to show some of them. One of them is actually available on the online database, the other one isn't. But just a little background. So blackface was a theatrical form of makeup that was used in what was called minstrel shows in the 19th century. So the genre started around the 1830s. And in Canada, there's evidence of it around the 1860s. So the performers were predominantly white men at first. White women were not really permitted onto the stage until the 1880s, 1870s. who basically crossed racial and gender boundaries by mimicking Black men and women. And they would do this by wearing clothes that just didn't quite match, bright red lipstick, they would darken their faces, have exaggerated facial expressions. And then this was in order to entertain audience with a supposed authentic music, humor, and dance that would have been ostensibly common on Southern plantations. So this image here is from 1896. And it's of a man named Fred Hickey, who was a local minstrel performer here in Montreal. And he took 4 photographs dressed just like this in different poses at William Notman's studio. And in one of the photographs, this one here, he's posed in blackface with bright eyes and a wide smile. He's wearing a large top hat, an extravagant pinstripe suit with an extra long tailcoat that doesn't quite match the checkered shirt or floral bow tie. This kind of racial mimicry, as Homi Bhabha reminds us, is ultimately flawed, for while it has a colonial imposition on the identity of the colonized, showing them to be imperfect and flawed, or almost the same but not white, it also positions the performer as an imposter, almost Black but not quite. So, you know, I don't have time to really get into this image. I do so more in the book chapter, so you can get that when the book comes out. But it's a really amazing image because there's so few images in a studio setting in Canada of this type of performer. And there are numerous images of this. I think I was able to collect about 17 that I haven't quite yet been able to do anything with. But this next one here was one that really was a little bit striking. And it's actually named exactly as it was named in the archive by Notman and Son. So as you can see, the Mr. Campbell is actually the one who's dressed as a woman, wearing the bonnet. He has on a checkered dress with exceedingly large sleeves, and he's holding and sitting on the lap and gazing into the eyes of this unidentified male. And this type of image raises so many questions, like who is Mr. Campbell? And why is the male in the photograph unidentified? And were these local performers, or were these Americans who had traveled to Montreal and then wanted to get their photo taken at Notman? Like, these are some of the questions when you come across these kinds of images that you have to put them in their context and not think of them from today's lens of, oh, that's a racist image, because that sort of cuts down your ability to access them. So you have to put them in the historical time, the 1890s. Who are these people? What was going on? Why were they taking these pictures? And what does it mean to see this sort of gendered and racial performance all coming together on one frame? And what does it mean, too, that we don't know who they are? Ultimately, just to wrap up, the title of my paper was Locating Absence, Interpreting Presence in the McCord Collections. And it was meant to sort of capture my embodied experience working in the collection, because I truly believe that archives have the power to reveal as much as they have the power to hide. And there's a real need in Canada for more scholarly inquiry into just not the items in the archive, but also our archives themselves as meaning-making sites, and simultaneously also sites of erasure. So this tension between presence and absence, in my opinion, makes historical work very interesting and appealing to me. So thank you.
Our next speaker is Tanya Southcott. Tanya is a graduate student in the School of Architecture at McGill. Her current research explores the intersection between demolition and memory in the context of Montreal following the Second World War. Tanya has a BA in Environmental Studies and an MA in Architecture from the University of Waterloo and a certificate in Heritage Conservation Planning from the University of Victoria. She is a registered architect in British Columbia and has worked in both architectural and heritage consulting offices across Canada and the United Kingdom, as well as on archaeological excavations in Turkey. She continues to explore the profession of architecture through both practice and critical writing, and has written for various publications including Canadian Architect, Architecture BC, and Heritage BC. The title of her presentation today is Reclaiming Montreal's Memory, Demolition, and the Photography of Edith Mather.
Okay, I'd just like to begin by thanking the organizers of this colloquium for including my research in today's program. It's really an honor to be included among the participants here, especially given the early stages of my academic career. The research I'm about to present is taken from the final project of my Master's of Architecture from McGill that I completed this past summer. It's also become the preliminary findings for my PhD that I've just started. In my presentation, I'd like to talk about this project as it delves into a fairly recent acquisition of the Notman collection, the photographs of Edith Mather, a local amateur photographer. I've based my research on her photographs, but also interviews with her that I conducted this summer in her apartment in NDG. In Montreal, Quest for a Metropolis, Germaine and Rose ask us to interpret Montreal's urban environment as the cultural representation of the various urban regimes at work throughout the city's history. They argue that the urban environment is more than the extant structures, like this image of the construction of Place Ville-Marie in the mid-1960s, arguably one of Montreal's first modern skyscrapers. The urban environment rather includes what is built, what is preserved, and what is demolished. In a city like Montreal, whose evolution is as driven by demolition as it is by construction, the built environment reveals at best a fragmented version of its history. The rest of the story, what has been erased through demolition, must be found through traces in both public and private archives. I'm interested in a social analysis of our built environment that focuses specifically on the phenomenon of demolition, essentially reconsidering existing buildings in the context of what was there before, in order to understand the underlying social tensions and relations that shape the built environment. From this follows an investigation of the processes by which we categorize or name historic buildings as part of our heritage, in other words, the process of heritageization. This idea, for me, is epitomized locally by the controversial demolition of the Van Horn Mansion in September 1973, and Mayor Jean Drapeau's approval of the Israeli development scheme that depended on the demolition of the historic building, because, according to Drapeau, it was not part of Quebec's culture. Reclaiming Montreal's memory explores the role of the individual in shaping public or collective memory, especially when it is threatened through large-scale acts of demolition. This project positions demolition as the catalyst for preservation and the stimulus for our efforts to capture or create our own version of the world in the image of what is lost. On August 22, 2012, at the age of 87, Edith Mather, a Montreal-based amateur photographer, donated 4,293 black and white photographic prints and their negatives to the McCord Museum, documenting Montreal's evolving streetscapes between 1965 and 1982. Each image was shot, developed, and meticulously annotated by Mather herself, who then organized the photos into several albums. These she organized into 3 collections. My research draws primarily from the collection entitled My City, Montreal. This is Edith in one of only 2 self-portraits contained in this collection. With their emphasis on the built environment, her photographs illustrate the changing urban context of Montreal during a period of rapid transformation. Their meticulous annotation makes tracing the evolution of Montreal's streets accessible to a broader audience and brings additional, often forgotten context to the histories of particular buildings and landmarks. In the decades following the Second World War, Montreal emerged as a world-renowned modern metropolis, so identified through the construction of modern architectural landmarks, mass transit systems, and international host events. Driven by the authority and vision of Mayor Jean Drapeau, the downtown core became the site of several large-scale urban development projects. This ambitious construction program was fueled, however, by the large-scale demolition of 19th and early 20th century buildings. Demolition not only erased these buildings from the landscape, but threatened the heritage of citizens who identified with them. In many ways, the timing of my project was serendipitous. In my search for ways to track demolition and its role in the evolution of the city, Hélène Samson, curator of the Notman collection, introduced me to Edith and her photographs. At a time when Montreal was redefining itself through its commitment to modernization and utopian ideals, Mather's collection of images reveals a unique narrative. Her photographs challenge the built legacy of the city through their focus on sites of demolition and reveal an alternative history of Montreal as experienced from the street. Harbingers of urban change, Mather's photographs track the evolving streetscapes of Montreal through the structures that have vanished. They announce the collapse of institutions, the widening of streets, and the construction of expressways, documenting shifts in power by capturing as evidence the buildings that gave way to change. What's more is that Edith herself was happy to contribute to the conversation. We've had the opportunity to meet several times to talk about her photos and her experiences. This contributes to my underlying hypothesis that demolition, in fact, stabilizes memory by bringing people together through the will to remember. Edith Mather was born on March 8, 1925, in Hampstead, Quebec, and has lived her entire life in and around Montreal. In 1964, at the age of 39, she met and married her second husband, and together they moved into a two-story flat above Oman's Jewelry at the intersection of Green Avenue and St. Catherine Street in the affluent neighborhood of Westmount. It was a new beginning for her, marked by the birth of their son, Jeffrey. Mather's program of documentation began shortly afterwards. She had received her first camera as a gift from her father at the age of 11, yet there was little space for artistic endeavors in her early life. It was not until the mid-1960s that she became such an avid photographer. Advertised as a modern miracle, camera technology had become increasingly accessible to amateur photographers and hobbyists, especially women. Cameras were lightweight, easy to operate, affordable, and regularly marketed in women's magazines. Mothers in particular were celebrated by these ads as the family's photographer and gatekeeper of the family's memory. Mather's new life existed on the fringes of Montreal artistic life. Her husband, Brian McCarthy, a published poet, was well acquainted with the Canadian poetry scene. Yet at a time when art was synonymous with freedom and artistic life associated with cafes, bars, and intimate music venues frequented late into the night, Mather's daily routine was structured by her domestic duties. Each morning, she packed the pram with her son, her camera, and food for the day. Together, they filled their time walking the city's streets, each day a new route with no fixed agenda other than to take pictures of what they saw. Each evening, Mather meticulously annotated the photographs of the day, noting the location, date, and camera settings she had used. Eventually, she built a darkroom in her spare bathroom so that she could develop her own black and white prints and negatives. Buried deep within the volumes of photographs is this self-image of Mather, or rather her reflection repeated in triplicate in an urban storefront window. In this reflection, she reveals herself as a young, attractive woman, a mother accompanied by her child in his pram. Her expression is serious but kind, focused intently on her subject. More often than not, pedestrians like herself are peripheral to her photographs and rarely engage with the viewer through direct eye contact. In its uniqueness, this image describes an implicit context for the entire collection. In this photo, her self-image is analogous to the disappearing city, as she disappears and reappears through different versions of her real self. Her reflection reveals both the potential and the limitations of her lens. The closer we are to the original subject, Edith, the more complete the picture and the more legible both she and the city are. But context dissolves through the distance of multiple reflections, and the image becomes increasingly abstract. She is at once located and dislocated in time and space. This process of relocation and dislocation, of perceivable facts and absences, describes the subjectivity of the personal archive or collection. Context is most abundant the closer the audience is to the individual and the time and place the collection was generated. Moving away from this brings a broader context to the work at the expense of intimacy. One of the goals of my project was to reconcile the abstraction of her personal collection as it transitioned to the public archive with details drawn from personal interviews with her about her life and photography. Her oral history compensates for the limitations of the photographic record by relocating fragmentary images of the city that no longer exists within the context of contemporary Montreal. From her 4,000+ images, I selected 3 sites that she was compelled to revisit, given the number of photos of these places and the frequency of the visits she made there. These sites no longer exist physically, but they resonate like hotspots in the topography of Montreal's memory. I'll briefly present my research on one of these sites. Oops. In 1967, the Selby Street situation, or the Battle of Selby, was the biggest news ticket in Westmount, according to its local daily, the Westmount Examiner. Stories tracking Montreal Mayor Jean Drapeau's controversial construction of the Ville Marie, the new East-West Expressway, the province's expropriation of Selby Street and its adjacent properties, and the demolition of 239 family homes consistently made front-page news. The irony of Selby's story, however, was that until its imminent demolition, the street had played virtually a silent role in the history of Westmount. Located in Lower Westmount, or the area to the south of the St. Jacques Escarpment and the Canadian Pacific Railway, Selby Street shared little of the picturesque character for which the affluent Montreal suburb was historically celebrated. Westmount, as its name suggests, locates itself on the western slope of Mount Royal and the plateau that extends from the mountain's base to the south. Less than 3% of its land dips below the plateau's escarpment and sits a full 15 meters in altitude lower than the rest of the suburb. While the municipal boundary officially separates affluent Anglophone Westmount from St. Henry, its traditionally working-class Francophone neighbor, these 15 meters marked the informal divide between opposing worlds. During the late 19th and early 20th century, Westmount quickly developed into a neighborhood of grand detached and semi-detached homes, sited on large lots and surrounded by lush gardens and trees. By contrast, this strip of land to the south of the escarpment, literally the wrong side of the tracks, became the catch-all for buildings and behavior that had no other place in Westmount. In 1908, the municipality banned the construction of new apartment buildings and duplexes to the north of the Canadian Pacific Railway, reserving this land exclusively for the grand single-family homes. In 1913, all light industry, workshops, and warehouses were pushed to the south of this line, corralled into what became the suburb's industrial zone. This south part of the city was given over to small investors and building contractors whose speculative interests guided its development rather than any interest in preserving its idyllic park-like image. According to the real estate record in 1897, here they were free to, quote, disfigure by closely built terraces, end quote, the part of the city hidden from view by the escarpment. Selby first appeared on the map at the turn of the century during a period of significant growth for Westmount, with the creation of the tram line along Green Avenue. By the mid-20th century, it was lined on both sides with three-story multifamily residences, a building typology, according to a recent heritage study commissioned for the city of Westmount, that was, quote, historically held in contempt, end quote, in Westmount. As products of Westmount's strict building bylaws, these structures were of sound construction and built to last, yet at a much higher density than was typical of the suburb. Predominantly rental units, they were affordable for the working class and could accommodate sizable families. In October 1965, the province of Quebec announced that the extension of the Trans-Canada would begin in late '67. The Ville Marie Expressway, that much-needed east-west high-speed connection between the Turcotte Interchange and downtown Montreal, would follow the Canadian Pacific Railway tracks to the south through Lower Westmount. Construction required the expropriation of Selby Street and its adjacent lands, and the residents of Selby Street were given until June 30th, 1967 to evacuate their homes. The evacuation of Selby Street, however, did not run as smoothly as originally planned. Escalating housing costs due to Expo 67 and the stigma attached to large family sizes typical of this area made it virtually impossible for the displaced households to relocate in Westmount. Families were reluctant to move outside of their neighborhood, yet many had no other place to go. According to the Westmount Examiner, as of the beginning of October 1967, quote, families currently residing on Selby are living on borrowed time, end quote. Former tenants became squatters overnight as their homes were systematically expropriated. For months, these families stayed while their world was dismantled around them. Crews moved in to remove light fixtures, electrical wiring, plumbing, and to shut off the water. Then one by one, the houses came down. The Public Safety Department consolidated families into lower-level empty flats in order to minimize the fire hazard left by so many empty units. During demolition, the exterior stairs are amongst the first to be dismantled. However, this is, for me, a powerful image for the prestigious neighborhood, where exterior staircases were banned from certain areas as they suggested a particular class of people who were not welcome. The long and drawn-out process of expropriation and eventual demolition captivated the attention of the media and fueled the debate over the merits of progress and large-scale urban development strategies. The Battle of Selby exacerbated the credibility gap between politicians and their citizens by questioning the obligations of government towards the welfare of the displaced families. Families were forced out, and the expressway was well under construction, with the initial 3 kilometers opening in November 1972. In 73, the province returned the land left over south of the expressway between Green and Atwater Avenue to Westmount. The former site of Selby Street and its Victorian row houses was now a large gravel plot, sloping smoothly from the Ville-Marie on-ramp towards the lane just north of Saint Antoine. On June 21, 1973, the Westmount Examiner quoted the Roads Department as they worked to regrade the empty site, saying, quote, "It was all a mistake, presumably at the taxpayers' expense," end quote. As compensation to the community, this land was transformed into what is now a modest public green space called Selby Park. Seldom are boundaries between neighborhoods as palpable as the monolithic concrete expressway. Its hive of cars traveling at high speeds divides the landscape definitively. Only one building stands as a testament to the Battle of Selby by marking the often uncomfortable relationship between overt gestures of modernization and progress embodied in the expressway and the vestiges of Victorian-era architecture. Today, 178 to 188 Selby Street retains its coveted Westmount address by staking its claim over what remains of the urban landscape of Lower Westmount. Unlike the artificial manipulation of the park's topography, this isolated 3-story, stone-faced brick building describes Westmount's urban evolution in a very visceral way, recalling the loss of its former neighbors and the generations of families who lived along this once residential street. Edith Mather's photographs attest to the mortality and inevitable vulnerability of the built environment, despite our confidence in its permanence or durability. The act of demolition suggests that buildings, like people, have lives, a realization that brings us closer to our own encounter with death. Through her photographs, Mather transforms the demolished city into an artifact that can be revisited. As the urban landscape grows increasingly foreign, her albums become opportunities to reorient ourselves in the city. She uses the album as a device to recreate her world in the image of what has disappeared. By entrusting her personal albums to the Public Museum, she committed her photographs to public memory. This gesture is both an act of preservation of Montreal's buildings and streets, now long demolished, and her mark on the urban landscape. Mather's and Montreal's histories intersect in her photo albums, which are both typical of the pedestrian experience of downtown Montreal in the 60s and 70s, but also uniquely shaped by her personal experience. Edith Mather was inspired by the changing streetscapes of Montreal. For her, taking photographs became an act of empowerment. It gave her license to walk the city's streets and rewarded her day's efforts with tangible expressions of passing time. Photography was an opportunity to engage with the built environment, but also with a greater community beyond her immediate family. Eventually, she began to take photographs of the people she met on her walks, creating fleeting moments of intimacy. She would often develop these informal portraits and carry them with her on walks to offer, should their paths cross again. What began as a solitary exercise became a social activity and her unique way of engaging with the world. Today, demolition often goes unnoticed, an inevitability in a constantly changing city. Through my project, I've tried to position demolition as a critical event in the evolution of the city and one that foregrounds architecture in the public imagination. Preservation itself is a collective activity that grows out of individual acts of memory-making. In this way, demolition is a stabilizing force for the heritage or history of a place. Through demolition, the city questions its own permanence and engages the public in its rebuilding. Thank you.
Notre dernière conférencière, je m'excuse, est Céline Widmer. Céline est conservatrice de la collection des archives textuelles au Musée McCord, détentrice d'une maîtrise en sciences de l'information et d'un diplôme de premier cycle en histoire et en études médiévales. Elle a cumulé plusieurs expériences de travail dans les domaines de l'archivistique et de la biblioéconomie, notamment en tant que directrice des archives des Jésuites au Canada, mais également au sein d'institutions comme le Centre canadien d'architecture et Radio-Canada. Désormais responsable d'une collection d'archives entièrement textuelles, elle s'intéresse tout spécialement au potentiel de ces archives à travers de nouvelles voies de diffusion, faisant notamment appel aux perceptions. Le titre de sa présentation est le potentiel renouvellement. Je m'excuse. Le potentiel renouvelable de l'archive. Revisiter sa mémoire en interrogeant les 1000 vérités des sources.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais juste commencer je vais en profiter pour remercier Cheryl et Tanya pour votre super présentation, puis le fait qu'on ait la chance de côtoyer donc, les chercheurs qui viennent au centre de documentation, aux archives, et juste dire à quel point, pour nous, c'est très, très inspirant au niveau aussi de la manière de voir précisément le potentiel de recherche qu'il y a dans nos collections. Alors, merci aussi pour les présentations. Comme Mme Yeater l'a mentionné, aujourd'hui, moi, je vais vous présenter la collection des archives textuelles du Musée McCord à travers justement un regard de la diffusion et du potentiel. Donc, on a longtemps fait un rapprochement entre le travail de l'archiviste puis celui de l'historien, dans la mesure où le conservateur d'autrefois participait non seulement à la description et à l'analyse minutieuse des archives, pièce par pièce, tel un objet de musée, mais aussi à la rédaction d'articles de fond sur des ensembles de documents ou des sujets précis qui lui conféraient la qualité de chercheur. L'archiviste répond aujourd'hui à un monde changeant, et sa profession a subi au cours des dernières années de profonds bouleversements. La masse croissante de documents, la démocratisation de leur consultation, le resserrement des normes et des méthodes, la législation et l'avènement de l'univers numérique ne sont que quelques-uns des déclencheurs de cette transformation majeure. À la lumière de cette réalité, comment faire pour actualiser notre profession de manière à lui conférer un caractère spécifique, valorisant et actuel, et surtout, comment dialoguer de manière bonifiée avec l'usager? L'archiviste n'est ni un chercheur scientifique, ni un simple collectionneur et pourvoyeur de documents. Il a, selon moi, un rôle majeur à jouer dans la communication qu'il fait de sa collection. Si le principal outil de communication des fonds et collections d'archives utilisés au Musée McCord est actuellement l'instrument de recherche, qui est accessible en ligne sous forme sommaire et de manière plus détaillée via le logiciel interne de Museum System, les descriptions puis les synthèses d'ensemble documentaires qu'il comprend, mais ça demeure des outils conceptuels de présentation à caractère général qui servent principalement les chercheurs et qui se déplacent en salle de consultation. Une sélection complémentaire de pièces numérisées est aussi disponible via le site Internet du musée, mais elle ne représente pas encore uniformément l'ensemble de la collection, puis elle permet difficilement la recherche à distance. Sans chercher à remettre ces pratiques en question, puis en continuant de servir à la fois les intérêts des chercheurs et ceux du grand public, je me suis demandé quelles nouvelles avenues pouvaient être envisagées pour mieux communiquer le plein potentiel de nos archives. À chaque institution, ses spécificités, la collection d'archives textuelles du Musée McCord, elle a cette particularité d'être distincte des collections à caractère davantage matériel ou iconographique. Une distinction entre textuel et visuel qui, moi, m'apparaît des plus intéressantes dans un contexte muséal. La particularité du textuel, elle porte en effet son lot de complexité en termes de diffusion, comme en témoigne par exemple cette lettre de Frederick George Scott à son épouse, et dont la calligraphie est très difficile à déchiffrer. J'ai voulu, dans cette présentation, explorer différentes possibilités qui permettraient de mieux communiquer puis de mettre en valeur le contenu de ces documents, a priori non visuels. Cette mise en valeur pourrait se faire à la fois par la présentation de fonds et collections via le web, mais aussi par le biais d'expositions ou d'activités culturelles. Si l'élaboration des descriptions générales permet la recherche subséquente par mots-clés de contenus spécifiques, je me suis demandé si l'inverse ne pouvait pas aussi s'avérer inspirant pour l'usager. Dans l'objectif de rejoindre un public large et varié, est-ce que ce ne serait pas pertinent d'utiliser le spécifique, soit un document ou même un extrait de document, pour présenter plus généralement un fonds ou une collection d'archives textuelles? Les principes de muséologie nous indiquent souvent que l'imposition de trop de lecture à un visiteur peut rapidement devenir décourageant. Il n'est pas exclu que cette démarche-là puisse être garante de succès, mais ça m'apparaît plus difficile de rejoindre un vaste public en proposant l'exposition d'une série de pièces d'archives uniquement à texte, sous vitrine et présentées en plus de textes explicatifs supplémentaires. C'est d'ailleurs ce que rapporte Florence Andréacola, qui est muséologue et doctorante à l'Université d'Avignon et qui s'intéresse à l'écrit dans l'exposition. Selon elle, lorsque l'écrit est exposé, la difficulté est d'équilibrer les textes de l'exposition et les textes des documents. Comment commenter du texte? Comment gérer l'aspect conversationnel généré par le document d'archives? Ce que l'on voit le plus souvent dans l'exposition de contenu bidimensionnel est une répartition plus contrebalancée de documents iconographiques et textuels. Aussi, dans le choix de ces documents textuels, on aura tendance à choisir ceux dont la forme est originale. Des archives, disons, à la calligraphie inusitée, munies de sceaux, d'armoiries, d'entêtes, de détails iconographiques ou encore très épurés au niveau du contenu, ce qui facilite en un coup d'œil une première compréhension. La mise en valeur de cette dimension matérielle du document représente cependant un compromis à la diffusion de l'archive textuelle afin qu'elle rejoigne l'usager ou le visiteur au même titre qu'un document à caractère plus visuel. Parce qu'au-delà de cet aspect physique, le document est aussi marqué d'informations dont le potentiel doit être communiqué. On peut certes voir à la transcription complète de textes ou à leur facsimilé, mais pour vraiment donner goût à l'archive, la faire ressentir de manière accessible, avec sa matérialité et son contenu, pourquoi ne pas carrément la suggérer de manière ciblée? Suggérer un document ou même un extrait de document pour illustrer plus grand peut s'avérer une initiation sentie et différente à un ensemble documentaire, mais aussi à une époque, un lieu, un thème, un personnage. Tout ne se décrit pas, les choses se ressentent parfois, et cette proposition m'apparaît susceptible de susciter différemment la curiosité des usagers. Comme dans l'exemple suivant, Kenneth George Mappin, qui participe à la guerre de 14-18, et qui est posté en France lorsqu'il rédige quotidiennement ce journal personnel. Les extraits suivants sont très représentatifs de l'ensemble du document. D'un jour à l'autre, Mappin décrit soit la température, ses activités militaires et ses loisirs. Comme on peut voir, la redondance « weather fine, weather snowy »,« fired stroke in the morning, a very satisfactory shoot, drill in the afternoon, firing again with the stroke, both morning and afternoon, fired stroke in morning, cards in the evening, wrote letters and played cards, bridge in the evening ». La redondance de ces propos et l'ambiguïté quelque peu froide ou insensible dans la description du quotidien du soldat laissent place à l'interprétation. La répétition dans l'écrit est d'ailleurs une forme absolument fascinante, selon moi, et sa mise en valeur et son analyse valent certainement la peine d'être communiquées. Toujours dans cet objectif de diffuser l'écrit, l'artiste contemporain Stefan Brugman y est allé pour sa part carrément, on pourrait dire, au pied de la lettre. Même si le contenu qu'il propose est loin de celui de l'archive historique, la forme et la manière dont il utilise les mots m'a paru inspirante dans ce contexte-là de diffusion du contenu. Le texte offert aux visiteurs, familier et accessible, amène ces derniers non seulement à assimiler rapidement le contenu, mais surtout à réfléchir sur son sens. L'action de regarder et de se questionner provoque chez le spectateur l'intellectualisation ou le ressenti du textuel proposé. Un autre exemple est celui de l'exposition viennoise Dream and Reality, Vienna 1870-1930 par Hans Holem. Même si l'exposition date déjà de plusieurs années, le conservateur avait alors choisi de dédier une salle d'exposition complète à l'agrandissement de documents d'archives sur lesquels il avait souligné des mots et des passages qui témoignaient de son point de vue. Dans les pages d'un quotidien d'extrême droite d'époque, il y faisait ressortir les nombreux mots dont l'étymologie était associée à des racines hébraïques, slaves et hongroises. Cette méthode muséographique semble avoir particulièrement plu à l'historien Tony Judt, qui en fait d'ailleurs mention dans son ouvrage « Thinking the 20th Century » paru en 2012. Je n'ai pas d'image de l'exposition viennoise, mais j'ai voulu faire un petit peu la même chose avec cette carte postale qui fait partie de la collection du musée, rédigée par Louis-Philippe Bastien en 1917. C'était un soldat qui était affecté à un hôpital canadien localisé en France au moment de la guerre et qui communiquait par écrit avec ses proches. Dans un même document où il dit à son beau-frère « Vous savez sans doute que la censure est très sévère et qu'on ne peut pas dire ce que l'on veut », le lieu de provenance de la carte postale a physiquement été gratté par les autorités et vient littéralement appuyer son propos qui est dans la carte. Donc, communiquer le général en utilisant le spécifique peut ainsi contribuer à créer un lien qui est à la fois senti et signifiant avec un large bassin d'usagers. Ça peut certes s'appliquer dans un cadre d'exposition, mais aussi à toute autre forme de mise en valeur, comme par exemple la diffusion des fonds et collections d'une institution via le site Web. Le fait de voir l'archive et la prise de connaissance de son contenu la rend peut-être moins abstraite, puis sa compréhension aussi est plus facile et ça la démocratise auprès du grand public. Ici, toujours sur le thème de la censure, cette expression d'être quelque part en Angleterre ou en France revient sur tellement de documents dans les fonds des collections du Musée McCord. Ça m'a paru intéressant de la faire ressortir. On l'a d'ailleurs utilisé par le passé, j'ai fait quelques recherches, pour intituler des films, des romans. C'est une expression qui a été très réutilisée. Puis ça ne me surprend pas parce qu'à travers cette expression-là, j'ai l'impression qu'elle arrive à illustrer tout le caractère impénétrable de la guerre. La collection des archives textuelles du Musée McCord équivaut à 270 mètres linéaires de documents textuels. Si on compte approximativement 5000 feuilles par mètre, la collection se composerait de 1 350 000 feuilles, qui est un nombre impressionnant, puis dont la numérisation puis l'indexation complète n'est malheureusement pas envisageable pour le moment. Cette même collection se constitue à partir d'une politique d'acquisition qui est bien définie. Elle se développe de manière précise dans certains champs de l'histoire sociale, tels que la vie domestique d'individus et de familles, l'existence de clubs et d'associations amateurs, le milieu des affaires et des entreprises, etc. Le tout dans un contexte principalement montréalais au cours des 19e et 20e siècles. Puis malgré que ces balises-là elles soient essentielles au bon développement de la collection et à sa cohérence générale, elles ne sont pas directement liées au nombre envisageable de thèmes ou de sujets de recherche, qui, lui, demeure illimité. Il y aura une multitude de chercheurs d'horizons différents qui vont trouver dans les sources 1000 vérités différentes aussi, et ce, à l'intérieur même d'un seul document. Donc, devant la quantité documentaire, puis en sachant les infinis potentiels de recherche possibles, comment faire la sélection des contenus à diffuser, lesquels seront le plus enclins à susciter l'intérêt collectif? En archivistique, tout comme en histoire, on questionne les notions d'objectivité et de subjectivité dans la tentative de représenter le passé. On accepte de plus en plus la possibilité d'une histoire non unique. L'apport personnel et contemporain dans l'interprétation de l'histoire amène une mouvance plutôt positive à chaque discipline. Aussi, le rapport que l'on peut avoir avec les sources, qui est en constante mutation, nous amène à revisiter et à revoir les nuances possibles du passé. Parce que les archives ne sont pas tant des preuves objectives que des outils qui incitent à la réflexion et au ressenti. Dans l'exemple suivant, Jimmy Will, âgé de 23 ans, écrit à sa jeune sœur. Nous sommes donc en 1944 et ça fait déjà 5 ans qu'il a quitté Montréal pour aller se battre outre-mer. L'extrait témoigne de sa métamorphose depuis son départ, une phrase à la fois percutante et pleine de sens, qui illustre les répercussions tant physiques que psychologiques de la guerre sur un individu. Il dit « So at last, you've got a picture of your brother, quite a change from the Jimmy who left Canada. I was always puzzled as to whether that face I saw in the mirror was mine or the fellow's beside me. I am beginning to get used to the new Jimmy Will, and let me tell you, he's a lot worse than the old one. » Vincent Bonnin, qui est un archiviste, mais aussi un historien, puis un historien de l'art et un artiste visuel, qui a cherché lui aussi à montrer l'archive de manière différente. Avec ses 2 expositions et sa publication sur le thème « Protocole documentaire », il a réussi à promouvoir l'archive au sein d'une clientèle qui en a découvert tout le potentiel. Vincent Bonnin a su exploiter et réunir ses intérêts à la fois professionnels et personnels quand il s'est penché sur la situation des artistes contemporains canadiens au milieu des années 60. À travers donc, des documents administratifs qui étaient générés par ces artistes, il a choisi d'illustrer tout le bouleversement de cette période historique en utilisant, selon ses propres mots, des matériaux qui étaient a priori non exposables. C'est dans cette perspective que l'archiviste, selon moi, peut se positionner de manière favorable dans la sélection des sources à communiquer. son individualité étant a priori vecteur de créativité, la connaissance globale qu'il a de sa collection, la fréquence de consultation qu'il fait de documents variés et son contact avec une multitude de chercheurs lui confèrent aussi une proximité avec l'archive qu'il serait dommage de ne pas exploiter. Sans chercher à présenter une vérité unique, il comptera plutôt sur les multiples manières dont les usagers et visiteurs pourront recevoir et transmettre ce qui leur est proposé, comme si une subjectivité avait le pouvoir d'en faire ressortir d'autres. Dans cette lettre d'Oliver Asselin à son jeune fils Jean, rédigée en 1917, le paradoxe est sous-entendu, mais flagrant. On peut très bien imaginer les horreurs du front et des tranchées, mais pour le jeune enfant, cela lui est plutôt raconté à la manière d'un jeu et d'un voyage d'où on lui rapportera costumes et souvenirs. Mon cher Jean, j'ai écrit hier à ta maman que j'essaierai de t'envoyer bientôt un casque ou un bonnet de soldat allemand. J'en ai un, mais il est avec moi dans les tranchées, et pour le moment, il ne m'est pas facile de le mettre à la poste. En attendant, voici une épaulette d'officier ou de sous-officier du 63e. Ce sera pour toi un joli souvenir. Dans cet ordre d'idées, de dialogue, de réception et d'échange de perceptions, est-ce qu'il serait possible de pousser encore plus loin l'expérience en impliquant des acteurs externes dans le choix et la manière de diffuser les archives? Dans la recherche de projets novateurs liés à la mise en valeur, pourquoi ne pas provoquer volontairement et régulièrement des rencontres avec l'autre? Partager concrètement sa vision avec des individus issus de disciplines variées permet non seulement d'être inspiré par l'autre, mais aussi de voir sa propre perception des choses se transformer. Cette forme de collaboration permet aussi de positionner l'archiviste favorablement en lui fournissant des moyens de rejoindre de nouveaux publics, parce que chaque discipline connexe a sa propre clientèle. Si la communication des archives passe par la sélection de contenus, c'est aussi par la manière novatrice de transmettre ces contenus qu'une nouvelle forme de diffusion peut être envisagée. À travers la pluridisciplinarité, le regard de l'autre, la mise en commun, l'apport d'expertise variée deviennent autant de moyens de façonner et d'animer les documents. Cette réflexion a été entamée de façon commune à l'hiver 2012 avec Nicolas Bednars, un collègue archiviste de la Ville de Montréal, afin d'élaborer les bases d'un projet de diffusion à venir. En cherchant à mettre en relation individualité et pluridisciplinarité, nous avons statué de certaines balises au projet en identifiant les objectifs, le sujet et les thèmes abordés, la forme et les participants impliqués. Ce qui prendrait la forme d'une performance multidisciplinaire présentée devant public aborderait le thème de la Première Guerre mondiale sous un angle social, marquant les communications et perceptions éloignées entre les Montréalais présents au front et ceux demeurés au pays, davantage impliqués dans l'effort de guerre. Nous avons choisi de travailler avec une équipe dont les participants seraient musiciens, auteurs et graphistes, des professionnels maîtres de leur discipline, susceptibles de porter un regard différent du nôtre sur les archives et donc pleinement inspirant dans cette recherche nouvelle de communication. Le recours à certains extraits de documents, leur mise en valeur et leur interprétation orale, musicale, visuelle et multimédia devant public visera à offrir l'archive différemment, amenant les usagers à ressentir ce qui leur est présenté et à y réfléchir. L'extrait ici provient d'un cahier de type répertoire des membres du Junior League, listant toute leur implication à l'effort de guerre entre 1914 et 1918. Alice Lighthall y signe un texte d'introduction très émotif dans lequel elle ne peut s'empêcher de mentionner l'apport positif de cette guerre pour la condition féminine à Montréal. Donc, par cet exercice, nous cherchons à proposer un dialogue différent avec le public. Sans toutefois proscrire les méthodes et outils existants, nous cherchons également à lui offrir de nouveaux horizons de consultation. Croyons que la mise en valeur d'une sélection d'archives ou extraits de documents dans la présentation d'un ensemble plus large a la possibilité d'évoquer un propos riche de sens et accessible tant au plan visuel qu'au niveau de l'assimilation de son contenu. Une sélection sur un mode subjectif nous a semblé cohérente comme moyen de transmission des savoirs et des sensibilités, dans la mesure où il donne à l'usager toute liberté d'interprétation et de ressenti. Et le tout peut très bien être soutenu de contexte et d'explications historiques. Quant à l'interprétation par différents acteurs, elle permet de façonner et de présenter les documents de manière nouvelle afin qu'ils soient assimilés différemment. La collaboration interdisciplinaire contribue aussi à la remise en question de notre propre mémoire, nous permettant d'explorer le caractère inépuisable des sources et leurs 1000 vérités. Notre rôle d'archiviste ne réside pas dans une simple application obligée de principes professionnels nécessaires en appui aux autres. Il doit également s'étendre à la transmission de notre vision propre et personnelle du patrimoine. Ainsi, serons-nous, comme professionnels, projeter une multitude de subjectivités, encourageant une inventivité collective, variée et facilitant la rencontre avec des univers multiples, tout en mettant de l'avant la nature émotive et universelle des archives. Merci.